They framed him," Greg said quietly at one point. No one disagreed. The room fell silent again as that reality settled in fully. Whoever had taken Simone had not only abducted her, but had also eliminated the most convenient suspect before the investigation could even begin. Carter leaned forward then, his tone steady but firm. He said that the police would figure it out, that whoever had done this had made mistakes somewhere along the way. He reminded them that the grave had been revealed because of a storm, which was something outside anyone's control. That meant the plan hadn't been perfect. Simone watched him as he spoke. There was comfort in his certainty and the way he seemed so sure that justice would come. She wanted to believe it. She needed to believe it. But beneath that hope, there was something else beginning to form inside her. A quiet awareness that the person responsible had been close enough to orchestrate all of this without raising suspicion. As the night went on, the conversation drifted between memories of Simone before everything happened, and speculation about who could have done something so calculated. They discussed the abandoned house, the supplies in the basement, and the timing of Jack's death. Eventually, people began to leave. Anna hugged Simone tightly before walking out. Stacy squeezed her hand. Greg gave Carter a firm nod before stepping into the hallway. One by one, the apartment grew quieter again. Carter stayed behind. He helped clean up, stacking plates and wiping down the table as Simone sat on the couch, staring at nothing in particular. When he finished, he sat beside her and asked gently if she was okay. She nodded, though the truth was more complicated than that. Jack hadn't been the monster, which meant that the real one had been somewhere else all along. After the news about Jack's death settled in, something shifted inside Simone. A few days after Jack was identified, detectives asked Simone to come back in for a longer, more detailed interview. This time the questions were different. They weren't asking what Jack might have done. They were asking about the masked man, like every movement, every sound, every detail she could remember, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. They recorded everything carefully while Simone walked them through her month in captivity again, slower this time, stopping frequently to make sure nothing was overlooked. She described the routine, the timing of the meals, the way the man moved, the silence. She talked about the night he stood over her bed while she slept, the night he laid out the rope, the tape, the condoms, the phone vibration that interrupted him, the exact tone she heard, the way he checked the screen before leaving. She mentioned the food. She remembered how every meal had been strangely specific. Grilled chicken seasoned the way she preferred, brown rice instead of white, the same brand of yogurt she bought weekly. Even the fruit had been cut the way she liked it, with the skins removed from apples because she had once casually mentioned she didn't enjoy the texture. At the time, she had been too focused on survival to question it deeply, but now it felt intentional. The clothes had fit perfectly. When fresh clothing had been left for her after the first week, they weren't random sizes pulled from a store rack. They were her size exactly. Not just small or medium, but tailored to her proportions, like the pants that didn't bunch at the waist, tops that fit her shoulders correctly. Whoever bought them hadn't guessed. And then there were the personal products. The brand of feminine hygiene products left in that box in the corner had been the exact brand she used. Not a generic version, not a common substitute, the same specific brand she kept in her bathroom cabinet at home. It wasn't the most popular option on the shelf either. It was the one she had preferred for years. When she finished, one of the detectives leaned back in his chair and said something that shifted the entire tone of the room. "That's not random," he said quietly. The suspect had known her habits. Investigators began reconstructing her inner circle. They built a list of everyone who had regular access to her life: family members, close friends, co-workers, neighbors, past relationships. They interviewed them one by one methodically, eliminating no one based solely on familiarity. Her mother was interviewed again. Wendy was brought in for additional questioning, despite having been openly cooperative from the beginning. Every co-worker in her department was re-interviewed separately, this time with more pointed questions about their access to her home. their knowledge of her routines and their whereabouts during the week she disappeared. They even tracked down her ex-boyfriend. It had been a messy breakup 2 years prior, one that left both of them bitter for months. He had sent angry texts back then, made a few emotional phone calls that Simone eventually blocked. On paper, it looked like a motive. Detectives interviewed him extensively, pulled his phone records, verified his work schedule during the time Simone went missing. He had been traveling for work out of state that week, confirmed by surveillance footage, credit card transactions, and co-workers. He was cleared. Next, they revisited the abandoned house and basement more thoroughly. Forensics had already processed the obvious evidence, but with a new lens they looked again. The scooter tracks had been documented. Rental companies were contacted to trace electric scooter usage in the area around the time Anna's friend had seen the hooded man. That produced several possible matches, but nothing conclusive at first. Then a small detail surfaced. One of the forensic technicians re-examined the duct tape left on the table the night Simone was almost assaulted. Though the suspect had taken the bag with him, a small piece of torn adhesive remained stuck to the edge of the table. It contained a partial latent print that was smudged but recoverable. It wasn't enough on its own, but it was something. At the same time, investigators began reviewing phone metadata from the night Simone was rescued. They pulled tower pings from devices that had been active near the wooded area around the time she was found. Most were explainable, like officers, the co-workers searching passing drivers. One device, however, had pinged twice within a narrow time frame near the abandoned property before Simone was rescued, and it didn't belong to Jack. The number was traced. The same number also showed a brief signal drop roughly 1 hour before Simone reported the masked man had left the basement the night he laid out the rope and tape. That narrowed the field significantly. Investigators cross-referenced that number with people in Simone's immediate circle. The partial fingerprint from the tape was then run against their database of interviewees. It wasn't a full match at first, just a potential correlation. But when paired with the phone data, the rental records of a scooter reserved using a prepaid account that traced back to a familiar IP address, and surveillance footage from a hardware store showing someone purchasing industrial fencing weeks before Simone disappeared, the pieces began aligning. The fencing. The exact type bolted into the basement. The purchase had been made with cash, but the individual had been captured briefly on camera, with their face partially visible, posture recognizable. The IP address connected to the scooter rental account had been accessed multiple times from a location investigators knew well. Once they put all of it together, the pattern was undeniable. They called Simone in. She sat across from the two detectives again, her hands folded tightly in her lap as they laid out the evidence carefully. They explained everything. They told her that the suspect had orchestrated Jack's murder first, staging the disappearance to frame him convincingly. They explained how the burial site had been chosen deliberately but was compromised by the rain. They detailed how the basement had been prepared in advance, how her preferences had been used to maintain control and predictability. Then they told her the name, and for a moment Simone didn't react. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She stared at the detective, certain she had misheard him. "That's not possible," she said quietly. But the evidence was. And as reality began settling in, disbelief gave way to something heavier. The detectives were careful with how they said it. They laid out the phone data, the partial fingerprint, the scooter rental trail, the fencing purchase, and the proximity timeline. But then one of them leaned forward and spoke plainly. "It's strong," he said, "but it's not strong enough to arrest him yet." They needed more. The fingerprint from the tape was partial. The phone pings placed the suspect near the woods but didn't prove he was inside the basement. The fencing purchase connected him circumstantially. Everything pointed in one direction, but none of it alone crossed the threshold for an immediate arrest. They had applied for a warrant to search the suspect's house, but it was moving through the system, and because the case involved multiple layers such as kidnapping, homicide, and premeditation, the approval required careful review. Judges needed probable cause that would hold up in court. The detectives were confident that once they got inside the house, they would find the final piece, such as clothing fibers, materials matching the insulation, digital evidence, or something tying him directly to the burial site. But until then, they had to wait. "You cannot say anything," the detective told Simone firmly. "Not to your friends, not to your coworkers, not even to your mother yet. If he suspects we're onto him, he could destroy evidence or worse." She swallowed hard. "So I just act normal?" "Yes," he replied. "You act like everything is normal. You let him believe he's still in control." The word control sent a chill down her spine. She left the station in shock, the world outside feeling unreal and distorted. The next few days blurred together, then one night everything broke. She had fallen asleep later than usual, as she was exhausted from pretending. The house was quiet, but then a sound woke her up. It was a soft click of her front door, the faint shift of wood. She then heard footsteps. They were slow at first, then closer, moving down the hallway towards her bedroom. Her body reacted before her thoughts did. She jumped out of bed and rushed toward her door, reaching for the small interior lock. Her hands were shaking so badly she fumbled it, but it was too late. The door pushed inward before she could secure it, and a hooded figure rushed in. He moved fast, strong and decisive. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her forward before she could scream properly. Her heart slammed in her chest as he dragged her into the hallway, her bare feet sliding against the floor. She thought she was being taken again. He was trying to get her outside. She fought, clawing at his sleeve, screaming this time without hesitation. Her voice echoed through the house just as he reached the front door. Then everything exploded. Police swarmed in from outside with shouts filling the air. Flashlights blinded the hallway, and officers tackled the hooded man to the ground within seconds, pinning his arms behind his back as he struggled briefly before going still. Simone collapsed against the wall, sobbing as she watched them secure him in handcuffs. They had anticipated this. The detectives had a hunch that once pressure began building internally and the warrant request was in motion, he might panic. They had stationed plainclothes officers outside her home, watching quietly and waiting, and he had come. They lifted him to his feet and pulled back the hood. Even before she saw his face clearly, Simone already knew. Her mother arrived within minutes, having been notified by officers. She rushed into the house in tears, grabbing Simone tightly and holding her as if trying to protect her from the air itself. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Couldn't believe how close it had come again. The news spread quickly. By the next morning, Wendy was at Simone's door, shaken and furious and heartbroken all at once. Together with Simone's mother, they went to the police station. They were led into a viewing room with a tinted glass window separating them from the interrogation room on the other side. An officer stood beside them quietly. "That's him," the officer said. On the other side of the glass, seated at the metal table under bright fluorescent lights. Simone's mother covered her mouth. Wendy whispered, "No," as if saying it softly would make it untrue, but it was him. It was Carter, sitting there with his hands cuffed and his expression no longer calm and reassuring. There was no warmth in his eyes now, just something hollow and exposed. The detectives laid out the full scope of it afterward. Carter had been obsessed. When he confessed his feelings to Simone and she gently turned him down, something shifted inside him. Instead of accepting it and moving on, he began convincing himself that she didn't truly know what she wanted. That proximity would eventually change her mind, that he could position himself as indispensable. Then he began planning. He purchased the industrial fencing weeks before her disappearance, scouting abandoned properties until he found one isolated enough to modify without being noticed. He rented the scooter under a prepaid account to avoid linking his car to the property, and he studied her routines. When she left for lunch, which days she parked in certain spots. Then he needed an escape plan, and Jack became the perfect scapegoat. Carter knew about the HR complaint, and he knew Jack had once been reprimanded for lingering too close. He understood exactly how suspicion would unfold if both of them disappeared at the same time. He confronted Jack first. Investigators later determined that Carter had lured him under the pretense of talking through tensions at work. Then an argument escalated. Carter then strangled him manually and transported the body to the remote area where it remained buried until the rain exposed it. By eliminating Jack immediately, he ensured that when Simone vanished, the narrative would already be written.